pure bliss. Today we've got a special one. It's one of very few BMWs that still seems to believe in the brand's lineage. And it comes to us with a lovely manual transmission. A big shout out to my buddy who is letting me drive his car. He is sitting here, so you might see his arm in the shot from time to time. And he's also making me wear these ridiculous BMW driving gloves. We'll see how long this lasts, but shout out to him for the car and for the gloves. This is actually one of the reviews I've been most anticipating, if not for the fact that the M2 Comp is one of the most beloved affordable sports cars, then for the fact that it's actually pretty similar to my car, only better in every single way. And I'm wondering, should you buy an M2 Competition like this car, save a little bit of money, get an OG M2, or spring for an M2 CS? And with that said, let's get to the car. This is a 2021 BMW M2 Competition, and it starts life at a reasonable $59,000. The M2 has very few options, and this car is proof. With only $1,750 in options, your total cost on this particular example is $60,650. At the time of recording, there's only 27 brand new M2 comps available, at least according to cars.com, in the entire nation. And only a handful of those are manual. What that means is that these retain their values pretty well and can still fetch in the mid to high 50s, even with 5, 6, 7, 8,000 miles on them. But back to the options. This particular car is Hockenheim Silver Metallic, which runs, I believe, $550. It's my favorite of the 5 color options you can get on the M2 Comp. You have these 19-inch 788 wheels as standard, and they come in 2 ever so slightly different shades of gray or black. I'm fine with either personally. They're 9 inches wide up front, 10 inches wide in the rear, 245 section rubber up front, and 265 section rubber in the rear. You could probably easily fit 255 and 275 without any rubbing issues, and that would effectively be the same tire size you'd find standard on an M4, M3 or M4. The design of the wheels is a bit of a hit or miss for some people. I personally like that Y-spoke look. The only thing I don't like about these wheels is they block those beautiful brake calipers a bit more than I like. On the inside, you can have your choice of either blue or orange stitching / accenting. Personally, I like the blue, which is what this car has, but the orange kind of harkens back a bit more to the 1M, which many enthusiasts love. And the M stripes on the seatbelts here are a nice little motorsport touch. Lastly, you have the executive package, which this car has as well, and that gives you basically just the Icon LED headlights. They perform fantastic at night. They have a projector style LED versus that crappy old reflector style you used to find in the pre-LCI LED package on the M3s and M4s and on the F30s. This is a much better setup. It's just worth it alone for those Icon DRLs. They're just much better looking than any other DRL package you can get on the M2. You can of course get the optional MDCT automatic transmission for an additional $2,900, but personally I wouldn't. And you can get a sunroof for about $1,000, and I definitely wouldn't. Other than that, kudos to my friend. He has spec'd out a pretty perfect car, at least in my opinion. He's also added a few other bits and pieces like a CS style front splitter, as well as an OEM CS spoiler and 10mm spacers on all 4 corners. And carbon fiber mirror caps. Other than that, the car is mechanically stock, no tune, no suspension mods. It is a basically standard M2 OEM plus, I would call it, with the spacers giving you a little bit more poke. The engine is, of course, a true M engine, the S55, which is borrowed from the F80 series M3s and M4s. It's a twin-turbo 3-liter inline-6, producing 405 horsepower and 406 pound-feet of torque. Car and Driver has gotten a manual to 60 in 3.9 seconds, which I think includes a rollout and probably techniques that you as an owner would not want to use, but it proves that this car is very quick and get the power down fairly well to the wheels despite having a good chunk of horsepower and being rear-wheel drive, even though I personally won't be launching the car hard at all. I definitely can believe that this is a quick car, and with that said, let's get to driving. Setting off here in the M2, I currently have the throttle in Sport Plus and I have the steering on Sport. I love heavy steering, but I think I find the Sport Plus steering to be a tiny bit too heavy, especially with these slightly wider wheels up front. And the gloves are off, literally and metaphorically. I'm ready to fight with this car, to duel with the M2 and find out if it's my cup of tea. A hit? I think it is. The first thing I noticed when driving this car is the size. And while there's plenty of room here on the interior, the general footprint, the wheelbase, the car is just short and compact, and it's the size you kind of hope a car would be. It's not that I do think actually that many of the modern cars available within the BMW lineup, such as the new 4 Series, the M4, are massive. I think it's about the same size as the previous generation M6, and this feels like it fills in that void perfectly and gives you a car that allows you to toss it around and have some fun with it, and it feels wrapped up around you in a very unique way, I would say, in the current market. So it really feels like it reminds me a lot of the E82 1 Series. That's the same chassis 1 Series that the 1M was built on. And yeah, the size is just fantastic. The proportions are a bit better on this than that older 1 Series, especially in the M form or in the M format. The chassis is definitely rigid, and the suspensions, it's on the harsher side and can be a little bit harsh from time to time, but it's also very confidence inspiring, especially at the limit, and especially for a car of this, let's say, power output and at this price point. The chassis dynamics feel more similar to me here to a Porsche Cayman than they do to my F30 340i. This is a real return to form for BMW. While the new G80 Series M cars, which I haven't driven yet, seem massive, this hits the nail on the head between practicality and sportiness. I've briefly driven an M2 Competition with the MDCT automatic transmission, and it's a fantastic dual clutch transmission. There's no denying that. But even after a few minutes of driving, some of the engagement and driving pleasure begins to dissipate with that automatic, albeit, of course, a more convenient transmission for puttering around in traffic. I just find myself yearning for the engagement that this has to provide. And it's just such a brilliantly easy transmission to use. This makes me look really good, especially when I'm driving hard, which I've only done for about 3 minutes, but it's a good time. Let's, on that note, we'll go to third for Austin. Look at that, so easy. It does feature auto rev match and hill start assist, which again just make driving this manual that much more easy. Let's say they incentivize you to get a manual over the DCT. I do wish there was a way independent of turning off the stability control to get rid of the rev match. Not that I necessarily personally have interest in doing it, but that having that option is nice. But I do know that the new G80s do have that as a standalone feature, which is a pretty good indicator that the next gen M2 will indeed also have the ability to turn the auto rev match on and off independent of the stability control system. Comparing this to my F30 340i, even with the LSD my car has, this is hands down better in every single way. I'll link a video, or I'll link up my car's video up above if you want to check it out, but this is just dynamically better in every single sense of the word. Of course, this, especially used, still costs a lot more money than my car, so I understand there's a price delta involved, but if you can, and if you don't need the back seats or the back doors, there's just no, this is just better in every single way. All of this actually brings me to the OG M2, which was made between 2016 and 2018, and it lacks the true M motor, the mirrors, the seats, and that big muffler of the comp. But what it brings is a bit of a nicer engine note, or exhaust note I should say, standard, and it's a bit lighter as well. It also brings, or has the advantage of, a bit of a lower price point. Typically you can find an OG, even with low miles, even a newer OG M2 for 40, 45 grand, which is easily $10,000, $15,000 less than the comp. Obviously that's a good chunk of change, and I guess it makes the decision between the two a little bit more interesting. Believe it or not, I actually like the muffler on the Competition, which makes me really weird. Most people hate it. They want to paint it, like my friend, or put an exhaust system and get rid of it altogether. For me, it screams motorsport, although I will admit it is a bit dramatic, and there is actually like a little bit of a gap above the muffler where they could have just tucked it in higher. I don't know why they didn't, but again, I'm cool with it. I let it slide because the driving experience of this car is so good that an ugly muffler couldn't even come close to ruining the experience. And again, I like the muffler, and I even like the sound of this car, which makes me even weirder. this thing pulls. I actually don't mind the exhaust. I've kind of always been a fan of that farty, burbly noise that most people can't stand, and I'm not afraid to say it. I like it. Like, I like the burbles and I like the high-pitched noise. I understand there's an appeal to the N55 exhaust now. I used to have a 335 with the N55 that sounded throaty, it sounded great, but I would argue this sounds as good, if not better, actually. Definitely louder, and again, I will not let an exhaust note be the defining factor of a driving experience, especially when the driving experience is this good. Now, the active sound design, which is BMW's fancy lingo for saying that they pump exhaust note through the speakers, I don't love the concept, but in practice, it does a decent job of enhancing the experience, if you will. And you know what else enhances the experience? Having massive 6-pot calipers up front, straight off the F10 M5. Yes, they're overkill for sure. I know all the OG M2 owners out there make the claim that the brakes weigh an additional 30 pounds of unsprung mass and yada, yada, yada. I get it, and I understand it, and I respect that. But I also appreciate pressing that brake pedal and having an extremely reassuring feedback and sensation in the car slowing down quickly, which this does. And so does the OG M2. It's not a bad brake system, it's just that this is, again, I mean, it's overkill. So I'd rather have overkill with brakes than overkill with power and not sufficient brakes. One of the bigger changes between the OG and the Comp is front fascia. It's a bit more aggressive on this. It has the connected and larger kidney grills, as well as the more aggressive winglets on the side and the 3 little air ducts. I used to really like the simplicity and more subdued nature of the OG M2 styling, and I still kind of do, but I think neither car's styling is a defining or, for me, discerning reason as to why I would, or doesn't really discern why I would get one over the other. I think the price would dictate that a lot more. With the styling, they're similar enough that you kind of get what you get, and you know, people have their own opinions on which they like. I think my buddy says he likes this a bit more and it's a little bit more modernized. Again, I like the LCI version of the OG, which gives you the headlights and taillights of this car, but again, that more subdued nature. To each his own. Again, I would not let it be a reason I'd choose one car over the other. You also get the M mirrors here that look cooler, especially with the carbon caps, but in general have a little bit better visibility than the mirrors on the OG M2. I would know because I have the exact same mirrors on my car as the OG M2. I think the best part of them is the little winglet tip they have that, again, just reminds you you're in something a bit more special than a typical 2 Series. Yeah, so as I mentioned, the car features the same headlights and taillights as the LCI OG, which is the 2018 OG M2. The headlights look really cool. Their only downside is they have halogen turn signals, which the M3s, M4s, even the F30s don't have. It's a little gripe with me because when you have a weaker turn signal than the actual DRL, the DRL has to dim in order to let literally let the turn signal shine. I prefer it when, if you look on the M3s and M4s, the DRL can stay as bright as it normally is, even with a turn signal on. Really little nitpicking right there by me, but just something I noticed. And I guess one of the little things I don't like about the M2, which shows you that I really love this car, because that's a ridiculous thing not to like about a car. The taillights are different on this car as well. They're the same as the LCI. I like them more. I think they're a more simple, clean design. Some people think they're a little bland. Again, personally, I'm all for it, and I enjoy that LCI look in general, even on the OGs. Big rock. Generally, the car looks very well balanced on the exterior, and I've usually thought, or I've always kind of thought, that the regular Tours are a little bit too narrow and look a little bit goofy. I think that the M2s completely fix that and give you a more stout and wider stance. Those hips in the rear are perfection, and generally the car's styling and proportions just look a good bit better to me than a regular standard 2 Series like an M240i. On the inside, this is almost identical to the LCI OG, with the exception of the M1 and M2 buttons here in the steering wheel, which allow you to set your favorite combination of the throttle mapping and the steering. And if you have the CS, you can also set the adaptive suspension. And if you have a dual clutch car, you can also set one of the 3 stages of the transmission as well. On this car, you have a manual, so you don't have to worry about any of that. Wow, and it's a lovely manual. And there's, of course, the seats, which definitely look a lot better than the seats in the OG. Comfort-wise and support-wise, they're similar. I think I would still argue that, at least for my shape, the bolster support's a little better on these, but relatively speaking, and maybe the thigh support's a tad bit better as well, but comfort and support is similar. The look is really what gets you going when you look at these seats. Unfortunately, they still are Dakota leather, even here on the comp, which means that the interior quality of this is definitely a cut below the M3 and the M4. For me, that trade-off is worth it every single day of the week personally, because the driving experience is better, the size is better, the car is more tossable, a little bit more fun, even a little bit more planted. But it is worthy of noting, and if you really want the most luxurious experience in your M car, get an M4. You can get leather dash and leather door cards in here. It's, you know, this car is new, so it feels nice, but I've seen older OGs where this looks a little shiny and plasticky and scratched up, and it is one of the downsides. For me, even though I've dwelled on it now for a second, it just could not matter less. I'm so focused on the driving experience. I'm tapped in, I'm locked in, and that stuff is all peripheral. Another slight difference between this and the OG M2, even the LCI OG M2, which has a very similar gauge cluster to this, is that the tachometer on this goes to 8,000 RPM, and that's because the red line here on the M2 Comp is at 7,600 versus the 7,000 RPM red line on the OG. The gauges themselves are uncluttered and very easy to read. They're like a nice combination between modern digital LCD looking screen and analog gauges, a perfect balance, if you will. The only downside of these gauges, and this is true of both the Comp and the OG, is you don't get a dedicated oil temperature gauge. You have to choose between a digital speed readout on the lower LCD or an oil temperature readout down there. It's a slight trade-off, but again, it's well worth it when it comes to this car. You also get an actual M2 badge here on the Comp, whereas on the gauge cluster, whereas on the OG it just says M. Really not a big deal. Again, just the littlest differences between the OG and the OG and the Comp to make you kind of maybe feel that little tiny bit more incentivized to go with the Comp. Let's wrap this interior up with an obligatory tall boy test. Let's just see if the M2 is good at anything other than just driving pleasure. And on that note, a little blip and a tall boy test. Now look, the real reason you're gonna get a Comp over an OG isn't any of those things. Those things are just gravy. It's the engine. That's what pulls you in to the Comp, that S55 power plant, and it has some real big benefits over the OG. For instance, it can make a ton more power than the OG can, especially with just the simple ECU flash. These can easily get pretty close to 500 horsepower at the crank, around 400, 440 at the wheels. You're not gonna get that, especially not with just an ECU tune. You're gonna do some hardware, some forged internals, maybe a bigger turbo, definitely a radiator. So the list starts going. Now, one of the downsides and maybe the Achilles heel of this power plant is the crank hub, which you can spin and have a crank hub failure, whereas on the OG, your only really big concern is the charge pipe, which is a pretty inexpensive part to replace. You can get a metal one, I believe, or a stainless steel one, and you'll kind of have no worries, especially with stock power. So that's another thing to consider. Again, these aren't huge concerns, just things to keep in mind that do make, I guess, the decision maybe easier or harder for some people, maybe help you lean in one direction or the other. But no, the car's power plant is really the strong suit of the Comp. The engine, the power delivery really is so much more linear here. Now, I've only spent about 15, 20 minutes in an OG and in less than ideal conditions, but I noticed, and I used to have an N55 car like I mentioned earlier, but I noticed that the power is a lot more spiky, especially down low. It is a nice kind of kick in the butt torque, push, which some people like, but for me, and I love turbos, I'm a new age guy, I love turbos, but it's just so much easier to jump into this car and just, especially with a manual transmission, take off and get going. Let's see. Oh my God, man. in 2016, when the competition package came out on the M3s and M4s, a lot of people said that it fixed the F80s. The competition designation here on the M2, I feel as though it has changed a lot of things, and many for the better, but the two cars, the OG and the Comp, do feel like different cars. I know most reviewers are saying that the CS is the best M2 by a mile. And to be fair, I haven't driven the M2 CS yet, but I also know that most of those reviewers haven't driven the Comp likely in quite some time, and the CS is a limited production car that's gonna feel uber special right now. The OG is a bit better sounding, a bit lighter, and a bit more raw, all for less money. And the CS offers a few special bits and pieces, a bit more power, and an adaptive suspension for a lot more money, but this is the balance. I'm just of the belief that the CS is not worth the additional $30,000 when it comes to driving experience. Now, it's undoubtedly the better car, and if you have the money, by all means, get it. I know I wish I could, and it's gonna be a limited production car. The 1M has really paved the path for value retention when it comes to limited production, little fun BMWs, especially with a manual transmission. But for me, I can't justify that price difference if I'm talking about just experience. Now, I can justify the price difference of about $10,000, $15,000 between this and an OG when it comes to the driving experience, because I think this is the superior driving experience. I think dropping this down and feeling that linear power as you row through the gears, it's just, I mean, I don't want to say it's second to none. I know Porsche makes some incredible cars, but for this price point, for around 50, 55, 60 grand, I don't think it gets much better than this, at least not with a new or relatively new car, and getting all of the technology, the iDrive 6, getting with touchscreen and Harman Kardon audio system, getting lane departure warning, or you don't get lane departure warning, yeah you do. You get lane departure warning, not blind spot assist, getting cameras, getting all the little things that maybe make day-to-day life with a car easier, and getting the raw, fun driving experience all in a really nice, compact package. You don't get that today in the market with just about any other car, aside from a Miata, maybe. But really, this is the sweet spot. I sit here now being a bit more realistic and thinking about how there aren't many brand new comps sitting at dealer lots. So if I'm considering a used M2 comp for about 55 or an OG for around 40, 45 grand, if I could swing it, I'm walking away, or I should say driving away, with the comp every single time. If you guys enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing. New videos are coming out every single week. And this particular one was very special. Thanks to my friend again for letting me borrow his baby. As always, this is Rio.